Today, we're going to look at a huge breakthrough in creating the next generation of materials. We're talking about stuff that isn't just strong and sustainable, but can actually, well, think.
So, just imagine for a second. What if a bridge could tell you it was damaged? Or if a material could sense a tiny invisible crack and send out a warning signal before something terrible happens? Now, this isn't science fiction anymore. It's the goal of a field called structural health monitoring, and the key might actually be found in plants.
All right, let's dive into how this all works. To build these kinds of self-aware structures, you need what are called smart materials. But as you can imagine, creating them involves a really fascinating challenge. You've got to blend the best of nature with some pretty high-tech ideas.
Okay, so at the heart of our story today are natural fiber composites, or NFCs. The easiest way to think of them is like nature's carbon fiber. They're made from plant fibers, like jute, which are then set in a polymer. That polymer acts kind of like a super strong glue. And what you get is a material that's not only lightweight and surprisingly strong, but it's also way better for the environment.
But, and this is a big but, here's the catch. For a material to sense damage, it has to be able to conduct electricity. The idea is that a crack would break that electrical circuit, and that change in the current is how the material talks to us. The problem? Natural fibers like jute are fantastic insulators. They totally block electricity, which pretty much makes them dumb in this world of smart materials. So, the big question is, how do you give this natural, insulating material an electrical voice? Well, that's where the researchers got really creative and came up with a pretty groundbreaking new recipe. The whole idea was brilliantly simple, really. If the material itself won't conduct electricity, well, what if we just build an electrical superhighway right through it? A three-dimensional, microscopic grid woven directly into the very fabric of the composite. So, here's the recipe for making this happen. You start with your base materials. You've got the strong jute fabric for the backbone and the epoxy resin that holds the whole thing together. Then, you add two very special conductive ingredients, incredibly tiny carbon nanotubes, and then slightly larger, but still microscopic, short carbon fibers. This is just a perfect way to picture how these two ingredients work together. The short carbon fibers, they're like the main power lines running through a city, creating the major pathways for electricity to flow. But to make sure the entire network is connected, those even smaller carbon nanotubes act like the local wires, filling in all the tiny gaps and connecting every single house to the grid. Okay, so having the recipe is one thing, but actually making this material is a whole other story. It's this delicate, multi-step dance of chemistry and engineering. Here's how it goes. First, the jute fibers get a special chemical treatment. Next, the carbon nanotubes are carefully mixed into the epoxy resin. After that, they do this really cool process called flocking, where the carbon fibers are basically shot onto the jute sheets with static electricity so they stand up vertically. And finally, the whole thing is infused with that nanotube-filled epoxy, compressed and cured into a solid panel. Now, you might be wondering about that first step. Why even bother treating the jute? Why can't you just use it raw? Well, it turns out this is one of the most important parts of the entire process. See, here's the thing. Raw jute absolutely loves water, and that's a huge problem when you're trying to mix it with an oil-based epoxy resin. It's like oil and water. They just don't bond well at all. But after that chemical treatment, the jute becomes completely hydrophobic. It literally repels water. This is crucial because it ensures the epoxy can form an incredibly strong, durable bond with every single fiber. And here's what it looks like under a microscope. It's pretty amazing. You can see the large, bundled jute fibers. That's what provides all the structure. And then nestled right in between them, you see those bright little lines? Those are the short carbon fibers, creating the bridges for our electrical network. It really is a beautiful marriage of natural and synthetic materials. So the team built their material. They had their recipe, they had their process, everything was ready to go. But when they started testing it, they stumbled onto something completely unexpected, something truly remarkable. A single, tiny variable that made an almost unbelievable difference. The whole thing came down to the length of those little carbon fibers. So they tested two different sizes. One batch was 150 micrometers long. That's about the width of 2 human hairs. The other batch was just a bit more than twice as long, at 350 micrometers. Seems like a tiny difference, right? Wrong. It was an absolutely enormous difference. Get this, the composite made with the slightly longer carbon fibers was, in some tests, a staggering 5.2 times
billion times more conductive than the one with the shorter fibers. I'm going to say that again, billion with a B. This was the big aha moment. So what on earth was going on? Well, these diagrams from the research paper explain it perfectly. If you look at the shorter fibers on the left, you can see there are just too many gaps in the network. The electricity can't reliably jump from one fiber to the next. But on the right, with the longer fibers, they easily overlap and connect, creating this continuous, robust power grid all throughout the material. It's that simple. You know, a discovery like this is way more than just a cool lab result. It completely opens up a new world of possibilities for how we build pretty much everything. So what this all boils down to is a recipe for a plant-based, eco-friendly material that has its own built-in nervous system. It's a material that can literally feel when it's breaking and then tell us about it. And the potential applications are just incredible to think about. We're talking about bridges that tell us when they need repairs before a disaster happens. Airplane wings that monitor their own structural health in real time. Even wind turbine blades that can sense fatigue. This really is the future of safe, sustainable, and intelligent engineering. It really leaves you with one final, pretty provocative thought. You know, we've been shaping materials to our will for thousands of years, but this research points to a future where our materials can actually start to communicate back to us. So the real question is, what will we build when our materials can think?